So I represent the American Mathematical Society. It's a society that speaks for 28,000 some mathematicians and about 560 institutional members that we have. We do about 85 books a year and about 25 journals we have and a big database discovery gateway called MathSciNet. Other than that, I won't bore you with stuff about the AMS. But it is a particular type of message. I don't claim to represent all publishers. I am representing a society publisher. The overall message that I have is that copyright, at least in my view, is still very much vital. Copyright law provides for a balance between the creator, the author, and the publisher, the distributor, the user. And in the US, of course, it's embedded in the Constitution. Politics still very much plays a part, as you can tell. These days, politics is a little bit, well, it's actually a little bit like my jacket, deliberately distressed. I really, at the moment, politics is, I would say, science and copyright issues are not necessarily at the top of the agenda. But having said that, you can tell that from recent events in the US with the appointment of Carla Hayden to the Library of Congress, to run the Library of Congress, and the departure of Maria Pallanti, who is the US Register of Copyrights. The Copyright Office actually reports into the Library of Congress. Maria Pallanti is now the president and CEO of the Association of American Publishers. But the House Judiciary Committee actually took note of this departure, and they're not terribly happy about it. And there is a movement towards actually having a separate copyright office. So copyright is still very much a part of the fabric. My other main message really is that we need to realize how complex the issues around copyright, how they're changing, the shifting nature of copyright issues, not just in the US, but in the UK and across the continent here. And if we find it difficult to understand, I'm not sure how we can expect researchers and educators to come to grips with it. And you can see these in issues that lie around Creative Commons licensing and the fair use aspect of things. I'm going to take you into a little bit of let's talk about CC BY. In terms of openness, CC BY perhaps is the Creative Commons license that best exemplifies openness. As an author, you retain copyright and you sign away rights for pretty much unfettered reuse, provided that attribution remains. But the question I would have is, do authors who sign away those rights retain the copyright? Do they actually understand all the implications of signing away those rights? You would think that it's fairly clear, but actually I would suspect that it's not always in the mind of the author when they sign a Creative Commons license, that their material might be misused, it might be abused. Most researchers would probably say, or they do say, that they want their work distributed as widely as they possibly can have it distributed. And actually many researchers may not mind that work is distributed for profit. But if it's misused, maybe your material is collated with other material that it shouldn't be collated with, maybe a publisher decides to slap an enormous charge for that content and of course you're not seeing any of that revenue back. Maybe it's just a misuse of your content. In the US, actually, technically, you don't necessarily have to register your copyright to be protected under copyright law. But if you want to bring a suit for copyright infringement, technically, you actually need to register that copyright. I'm fairly sure that many authors don't realize that fact. It might be worth also looking at the likes of the ResearchGate and academia.edu. The mere fact that academia.edu is called academia.edu, then actually both of those organizations are squarely for profit. you can tell there's a little bit of deception, misleading going on here. Sarah Bond in Forbes magazine, a journalist who wrote an article in Forbes magazine, wrote an article called Dear Scholars, Delete Your Academia.edu account. And in there she sort of talks about this initiative that they tried to launch within academia.edu, where they asked scholars to pay a fee to have their work recommended within academia.edu. Needless to say, there was a lot of huffing and puffing, and that initiative failed. But I would say that most researchers would not be terribly happy about that kind of reuse. Another thing to consider, perhaps, is the differences between STEM, the science and technical areas, and the humanities. In the humanities, say you're a historian, and I look over to Richard Fisher here because he's the expert on that kind of stuff, but if you're a historian, the argument you make when you write the paper, that's where the intellectual property lies, that's the value. If you're a scientist, you're writing a paper that describes the value, the intellectual property. Perhaps you're coming up with a cure for a disease, like the psychosis that comes from having very short fingers, something that our dear president might need to read. So if there's a different way of understanding intellectual property and where copyright and rights sit within the humanities and the science areas. I'm looking over at Rick, make sure I'm doing okay. A couple of minutes. I wanted to address fair use and fair dealing a little bit too. Fair use is a very broadly scoped and flexible construct, a very US construct, that really allows use under a range of categories, if you like. So, you need to consider the purpose of the use. You need to understand the nature of the copyrighted work. You need to know how much of the material you're going to actually use, and you need to know what effect that's going to have on the market for the copyrighted work. In the UK, you have something called fair dealing, and that's much narrower. In fact, fair dealing really says that your use has to be one of a number of specific listed uses. And you have to ask two questions. You have to ask whether the exception is in that list, and if so, is it fair? So it's much narrower. There is some, I did pick up that, and this might be pre-Brexit, I did pick up that David Cameron, when he was still able to do stuff, was interested in bringing in a more US fair use type approach to the UK, though there was no discussion about the registration aspect. And there was just an interesting case in Delhi. I don't know if anybody's been following the case at Delhi University, but in Delhi, publishers, the Cambridge University Press, Oxford University Press, and Taylor and Francis brought suit against Delhi University for what was happening with widespread photocopying of instructional materials to be put into course packs. The Delhi High Court actually threw out this suit. Then it came back. It's actually under appeal right now. But the fact that, where this is going to go, I'm not entirely sure. It's all really around the context of what really forms an instructional use of the content. But it tells us something about how we need to consider the shifting dynamics of use in balancing that against the rights of the rights holder. The copyright is still important, but we do need to understand that shifting dynamic and be a little flexible, I think, about how we consider the usage end, the consumption end. And that's it.